Hi, my name is Jason, and this is the second in a series of videos that I'm making to explain the rules of Malifaux, a miniature skirmish game. So if you haven't already seen the first video in the series, you might want to check that out. So in this video, I'm basically going to go over what you need to actually play Malifaux. Plus, I'm going to describe some of the terms that are used, some of the sort of overarching rules and conventions that go into the game. So to start off with, let's talk about what you need to play the game. So throughout this section, I'm going to kind of give you two options: the the real option and sort of the poor man's option, just so you can have an idea of what it will cost to get into this game if you want to go whole hog, or what it'll cost if you just want to sort of try it out and just buy as little as possible. So to start off with, you should probably have a copy of the Malifaux rulebook, which is this little book here. This runs about $15 in most places. You can get a copy online for free. However, it doesn't actually include any diagrams, so that's an option. But I would really recommend getting the book because it's nice to have an actual book rather than having to flip through a PDF. Next up, you'll need a 3x3 playing area. Pretty much anything will do, table, floor, whatever. I'm not going to give you a cost on this because I'm assuming you already have something you can play it on. You're also going to need some models, like these ones here, along with their corresponding stack cards. Now, again, if you want to kind of cheap out, you can use pretty much any miniatures that you have laying around. I would recommend getting a box set, the starter sets. They're actually pretty cheap. You can usually get them for around $20 to $30 depending on which crew you want to go with. But if you have some lying around, then that'll effectively make the cost zero on that. And all of the stats are published in the books, so if you know someone with the books, you can pretty easily get the stats and just write them on a piece of cardboard or something, just to use in the meantime. Each player will also need a fate deck. Now, what I have here is the official Malifaux fate deck. These run about $10, which really isn't too much. However, you can actually just use a standard deck of playing cards. There's just a conversion between the suits that are actually in the Malifaux fate deck and playing cards, so that's an option too. You will need a measuring tape or ruler, which measures in inches. I kind of prefer to go old school because, it's kind of easier to line things up with these, but that's your call. You can certainly use a ruler, and I'm assuming that you're going to have one of those lying around somewhere, so I'm not even going to include that in the cost. You should have some kind of terrain. I'm actually going to be using the Terraclips terrain, which is available through Weird itself. Each of these box sets runs around $25, $30, I believe. And it's actually pretty sturdy terrain. It's pretty neat. I highly recommend it if you're thinking of getting into Malifaux, but realistically, if you want to just have a cardboard card that says tree on it, that should probably work fine too. I just prefer having, actual terrain out. Lastly, you'll need a supply of counters and markers, which are 30 millimeters and 50 millimeters in diameter. These ones actually come with the Terraclips terrain system, so if you get that, then you get the counters with them. However, you can pretty much just cut out circles of cardboard if you like, as long as they measure the appropriate dimensions. Next, let's go over some of the terms that you'll need to know to play the game. First of all, the group of miniatures that you'll be playing with is called your crew. This will typically consist of one master, who is effectively the leader of the crew and your proxy in the game, and a number of minions, which are the core units of the game. A crew can also include a henchman, which is sort of a lieutenant, and can actually be run by a henchman in lieu of a master. I don't actually have one here, but that is an option. And finally, there are totems, which are sort of magical proxies for the master himself. The master can usually link one or more of these, and spells can effectively be cast through them, and they can give additional magical abilities to the master. As mentioned previously, each player will have their own deck of cards called a fate deck. They will also typically have a hand of cards called the control hand, which they can use to twist fate and alter a card draw. Whenever a check needs to be made, this will be done through a duel, which typically consists of drawing or flipping a card from the top of the deck, and then modifying the result. So a typical game of Malifaux is called an encounter. and encounters consist of typically around 6 turns, 6 or more, and basically during each turn, players will go back and forth in activating their miniatures. At the start of each encounter, players will randomly select one of a number of strategies, and that strategy is basically their primary objective during the game and is public knowledge. They can also choose a number of schemes, and schemes are basically secondary objectives that get you additional victory points. You can, with some schemes, also publicly state what the scheme is to gain additional victory points. There will be a few other terms that sort of come up throughout these videos, and they'll be explained when they do come up. I'm not going to go over everything in this one. Finally, I just wanted to touch on some of the sort of overarching rules that are pretty important throughout the game of Malifaux. First of all, whenever you have a fraction in Malifaux, you always round up with one exception, that exception being distances, where half inches are allowed. You may not pre-measure distances in Malifaux. You can only measure after you've actually committed to taking an action. When measuring distances, you always measure from the base of the miniature to the nearest edge of the base of the target miniature. If part of the target falls within range, then this is considered to be within the range. If all of the target falls within the range, then it is said to be completely within the range. And when measuring for movement, always measure from the same point on the miniature. So you can't start by measuring from the base edge, then move to a point where you're measuring at the back edge. This gives you an additional inch of movement in some cases. When the rules call for random determination of order, basically each person flips a card from the top of their deck, and the highest card goes first. And of course, ties are reflipped. Whenever you have multiple effects that affect the same stat, multiplication and division are always enacted first, and after that, addition and subtraction. Next, we'll go into timing. Now, this is kind of the boring stuff that everyone really hates to read and doesn't necessarily come up all that often, but I am going to go through it here relatively quickly, just, so that you kind of have a basis for how things work. When an effect occurs, you follow each instruction in that effect in the order that it's written. And if a second effect should happen as a result of that first effect, then the first effect is effectively paused at that point until the second effect is completed. In the event that multiple effects are supposed to be starting or ending during the same phase, then any effect that happens at the start of that phase starts or ends first, followed by anything during that phase, and finally anything at the end of that phase. If multiple effects are still occurring at the same time, then any effects that must happen resolve before any that may. Immediate effects occur before any other effects, and in the event that two effects are still tied, the current player's effects occur first, and effects caused by units within the same crew are resolved in activation order. In the event that two rules contradict each other, which will probably come up a fair bit, anything that's on a card supersedes anything that is in the rules. And in addition, cannot overrides can, and can overrides may. Alright, so that's it for this video. So hopefully you have a better understanding of some of the sort of very basic rules and terms that are going to be used in Malifaux. And I hope you join me for my third video, where we're going to sort of go over the basics of how to read a stats card and some of the stuff like that. So until then, have good games.